Senior Business Analyst on NYSERDA's Distributed Energy Resources team. And to say that we have a full house today is an understatement. We've got about 319 attendees on the line, with more joining. We have the full New York Sun team, including our Vice President of Distributed Energy Resources, David Sandbank, and our Assistant Directors, Max Joel and Shian Mehta, as well as the full New York Sun team. We also have some staff from New York Department of Public Service on the line as well. So I just want to acknowledge them and thank them for their time. I see Warren Myers, Jessica Waldorf, and Justin Fung. They will be available to help answer policy questions at the end. So let's kick it off. So today's presentation, we are talking about the expansion of the New York Sun program. In the recent order approved by the Public Service Commission, expanding New York State's distributed energy resource PV goal from 6 gigawatts to 2025 to 10 gigawatts by 2030. This program expansion has been a great labor of love and a great accomplishment, and many people, both on the public side and our private sector stakeholders, have contributed and filed comments and really helped shape this program expansion. So I want to thank you all for your participation in this endeavor. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Just a few bits of housekeeping here. First and foremost, today's webinar is being recorded. I know we're going to get a few questions about that, so I will state that again as we continue. We are recording the webinar. A copy of the slide deck in PDF form and a YouTube video of the recording, including the Q&A, will be posted on our website. I've got a link a little bit later, but that'll be on the Resources for Contractors page. And it typically takes us a few days to process the file and actually upload it to the website, but we will make you aware by email when that has been posted. Everyone on the line has been muted. We have a very large group today, so we're going to address Q&A via the chat box. In the lower right corner of your WebEx, you'll see a Q&A box. If you have a question, you can simply type it in there, and we're going to be fielding all of the questions towards the end of the presentation. We're going to run through and cover all the content, and then we'll address the questions that were not covered in the run-through. Next slide, please. And here's a little bit about the agenda. First of all, I'll give a little bit of overview and context about what this program expansion is. Then we'll talk about the implementation timeline. I know many developers are excited to submit new project applications as soon as possible. So I'll talk about the timeline details there. And next, we'll do a deep dive into exactly what the new incentive offerings are. We've broken this out into 3 subsections. First, we'll talk about the Upstate, or as we say, rest of state, part of the state. That's projects located in NYSEG, National Grid, RG&E, Central Hudson, Orange and Rockland territories. Then we'll do a deep dive into the Con Edison territory, which is, of course, New York City and most of Westchester County. And then I'll pass the microphone over to my colleague, Max Joel, and he'll talk about some incentives available under the Solar Energy Equity Framework, or SEEF. For those of you who are catching up on all the terminology, the Solar Energy Equity Framework is essentially the umbrella name for New York Sun's programs that support projects that benefit disadvantaged communities in low to moderate income households. Next, the last section will sort of be a grab bag of additional program details. We'll talk a little bit about the new prevailing wage requirements and some project eligibility rules. Once all that's wrapped up, we'll dive into questions and answers. I anticipate we'll have at least half an hour for Q&A. So let's move on to the next slide. Let's kick it off. And one more, please. So here's a little bit of a history lesson as well as the next steps. So looking back where we were 12 months ago, distributed solar, especially community solar, had really taken off to the point where most of the solar incentives, the New York Sun base incentive, the utility managed MTC and community credit in the NYSERDA community adder were largely allocated. There were no new offerings on the street for new project development. So the industry really found itself in a tough spot. The future of development was uncertain. No one knew exactly what form new incentives might take or when they might roll out. So to sort of progress the discussion of what's next, what are the next steps, Department of Public Service and NYSERDA, hosted 2 technical conferences to discuss, where we are in the state of the market, where we come from, and where do we want to go. So there were some nice presentations there. Some ideas were bounced around regarding potential changes to the value stack, regarding potential New York Sun expansions. And in that technical conference really paved the way and kicked off the process, which we call the Distributed Solar Roadmap. So that solar roadmap, which paved the way for another 4 gigawatts, bringing us from 6 gigawatts to a 10 gigawatt goal. That roadmap, we worked on that throughout spring, summer, fall of 2021, and that was ultimately filed with the Public Service Commission on December 17th. Many of you are familiar with the content of that roadmap on the proposed new incentives for Upstate, for Downstate, new community adder, as well as new funding for the SEEK, the Solar Energy Equity Framework. We hosted a webinar on the content of the roadmap a few months ago, and I expect that most of you were on that call as well. So that roadmap was filed. That roadmap was essentially a petition for additional funding in an expanded New York Sun program. That was open for a public comment period known as the SAPA period, and dozens of comments came in from the industry, from labor groups, from the public, from the joint utilities. DPS and the PSC sort of digested and took to heart all of those comments and suggestions. And on April 14th, about 3-4 weeks ago, the PSC issued an order expanding the New York Sun program. And that order essentially took the roadmap, made a few notable changes to it, and approved it. So that gives us a path forward and funding approval to expand the New York Sun program, as specified under that roadmap. So what we're talking about today is what are the details that were in that order and what is the exact detailed plan for NYSERDA to roll out these program changes. One of the next steps that's an action item for NYSERDA to do is to file an updated document with DPS called the operating plan. We have an existing New York Sun operating plan, and what we're doing is we're updating it with the new program details, the new budget details, and we will file that updated operating plan with DPS by the end of this month. That May 31st date was specified in the order, so we're going to get it in, at the latest on that May 31st date. DPS does not need to act on that order. It's not open for a public comment period. It's just an updated document that we're filing. Once that updated operating plan is filed with DPS, New York Sun can go ahead and roll out those program changes. We're shooting for June 1st, which is just about 3 weeks away. In that new program release, we'll include the new incentive offerings, new megawatt blocks, and some of the other details. I will get into each of those individual elements, in later slides. We'll also be updating program documentation, including the program manuals. You can expect a few more program guides posted to the website. And we are working on changes to the Salesforce platform. Next slide, please. So here's just sort of a mile-high overview of the megawatt breakdown that was in that roadmap and in that order. So we're talking about an incremental 4 gigawatt target, and that's just the delta between going from the 6 gigawatt by 2025 goal to 10 gigawatts by 2030. How does that, 4 gigawatts shake out? Unsurprisingly, we think most of that is going to be upstate commercial industrial scale projects. That does include community solar, and we're designing, just a touch under 3 gigawatts of incentives to support those projects. There is a very healthy megawatt carve out for projects located in the Con Edison territory. You'll see that that is 450 megawatts. We're taking a third of that, 150 megawatts, and that will be new funding for Con Ed residential projects, single family residential. The other 300 megawatts in Con Ed is going to be broken out into different size categories. In the roadmap, we essentially said, let's have, one incentive rate for smaller projects under 1 megawatt and another incentive rate for projects above a megawatt. But we received a lot of good comments from solar trade groups, from City of New York, and from a few others that said, given the economy of scale, the building stock in New York City, in the price points at which we're seeing project costs, achieve economy of scale, it actually makes more sense to have 3 tiers or 3 buckets of non-residential project sizes in Con Edison. So we have a carve out of 50 megawatts for what we're calling small non-residential projects. That's 200 megawatts and smaller. 100 megawatts for what we're calling medium-sized projects. That's 200 kilowatts to 1 megawatt. And then 150 megawatts for projects above 1 megawatt DC. So if you add all that up, the 2943 megawatts for Upstate commercial industrial in that Con Edison, you get about 3,393 megawatts. That's not quite 4 gigawatts. The balance of the additional 607 megawatts will mostly come from Long Island projects. And we anticipate that there will be about, 40 or 50 megawatts of Upstate incentive-free projects that are being installed. That Long Island share of 560 megawatts, because Long Island does not pay into the Clean Energy Fund, Long Island sites would not be eligible for the funding in the roadmap. However, at this time, LIPA, Long Island Power Authority, has not announced that they're rolling out new solar incentives. They think they can achieve that 560 megawatts without additional incentive support. So that was just a mile-high view of that breakdown of the 4 gigawatts. This is unchanged, from what was broken out in the roadmap in the last presentation. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Similarly, here's a rough breakdown of the budget authorized in that order. You'll see grand total $1,474 million. Excuse me. The bulk of that, about 950 million, is going to incentives, both the megawatt block incentives and the respective adders. There is about 239 million to assist the industry in transitioning to a new prevailing wage requirement. That prevailing wage requirement, which I'll get into in more detail on a later slide, applies to projects 1 megawatt AC and up that begin their utility application after a certain date. There's about 252 million for that solar energy equity framework, which is projects that support disadvantaged communities. And there's a small amount for the New York cost recovery fee, administration, and evaluation. And this funding is in addition to the existing New York Sun budget under the 6 gigawatt budget. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the rollout of the program expansion. Next slide. Oh, we're good where we are, this slide. So as I mentioned, NYSERDA is filing an updated operating plan with the Department of Public First at the end of this month. We've already been hard at work at that. We're making the changes. I anticipate no problem filing a meeting by that deadline. Once that is filed, we're planning on rolling out almost all of the program changes on June 1st. We'll post the updated program manuals. We'll update those real-time dashboards on our website and post other resources as appropriate. We're already busily working with the Salesforce programming team to do things like, code the new adders, code the new blocks, and make sure everything works. June 1st is really our target date. It is conceivable, however, very unlikely that we encounter some sort of technical glitch and it needs to get bumped out by a day or so, but we're confident telling you June 1st. Once that program is officially launched and released, we will send out an email to everyone on our stakeholder list and say, today's the day, go ahead, submit those applications. Next slide, please. So on June 1st, we're rolling out the new Upstate commercial industrial megawatt blocks. We're implementing the changes to the Con Ed non-residential blocks. And we're going to add that 150 megawatts of capacity to the existing Con Ed residential block structure. And the updated community adder will also go live on that date. I'm going to do my bullets a little bit out of order. The only thing that's not going live on June 1st is the inclusive community solar adder, which is the last block. We're going to release that a little bit later. And the reason for that is we want to make a few potential changes to the ICSA program design. This will be covered in more detail on a later slide, but we essentially want to have a round of stakeholder feedback in late May, early June. And once we get that feedback, we would implement the new inclusive community solar adder for implementation in late summer or fall of this year. So backtracking to the second bullet here, we're rolling out 800 megawatts of new capacity for the Upstate commercial industrial block. 800 megawatts is a lot. It's by far, the largest block we've ever released. That being said, we know that the Upstate block has been closed for about a year, and there is a lot of projects, sitting in the utility interconnection inventory that have been waiting to submit once we release the new block. We're pretty confident that 800 megawatts isn't going to go all at once, but we did want to put some thought into that rollout there. If, and this is a long shot, if more than 800 megawatts comes in the first 2 weeks of the program opening by June 15th, we would say, okay, let's hit the pause button, and we would order those 800 megawatts of projects by date that they made the utility interconnection payment. And we would rank them, projects that made an early 100% payment first, and we'd rank those in order. And then we would rank projects that made a 25% utility upgrade payment, but not a 100% payment. And then we would take, the first 800 megawatts and put them in that 800 megawatt block. And any additional projects submitted in the first 2 weeks that don't fit in that 800 megawatts would simply go into the second block. I know there's a lot of detail there, but let me say it again, just to give you another pass at it. We really want to prevent, a button pushing contest where people, might miss out on the first block because they just simply, didn't upload the documents quickly enough. So in the event, and I will stress again, we don't think this will happen, in the event that we get more than 800 megawatts of those Upstate commercial industrial projects in the first 2 weeks, the earliest projects, meaning those that made their utility upgrade payment first, would get the first 800 megawatts of the block, and any remaining projects would go into the second block. I know we're going to get some questions on this. We will address those at the end of the presentation, but the intention here is to really make sure that, mature projects that are ready to go, that have been waiting, will get into that first 800 megawatt block. Third bullet, I know everyone's really excited to go with the new incentive rates. Please do not attempt to submit an application until the block opens on January 1st. In fact, we're gonna essentially close the Upstate commercial industrial block in Salesforce until it launches. You can go you can start building out your projects in what they call unsubmitted status. You can populate all the project information, the equipment. You can upload all of the required documents and get it ready to go. And when we open up the block on June 1st, you would just hit submit. But please don't, try to submit a project before the block's open. I know over the past week or two, we've had, a large number of contractors trying to submit applications prematurely. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Now I'd like to do a deep dive into each of the subsets of new incentives and incentive adders. The first section is going to be on the Upstate. So on the table here, we see that the first new commercial industrial block, it's actually going to be block number 18 because we've had 17 previous blocks, but that first new block is going to be 800 megawatts DC at 17 cents per watt. We anticipate that 800 megawatts is enough to cover all the projects that are ready to submit when the program opens in June 1st. We are going to let you know that there is a second block after that. That'll be at least 350 megawatts, and that'll be at 15 cents a watt. There will be further blocks beyond that. Remember, we're targeting over 2,900 megawatts total of Upstate C&I blocks. But those individual block capacities and incentive rates are to be determined at this time. We don't really want to announce an incentive, too early, given all the turbulence that's currently occurring in the market. The Upstate C&I block is essentially a continuation of the previous program. It's still the same program. It's just a new block. So we're going to be looking for the same required documents, including proof of 25% utility upgrade payments. Again, that's a confirmation or email from the utility saying, yes, we received your payment, we got it. It's not, a screenshot of a wire transfer or a bank account. We're looking for the planning and zoning approvals. There is going to be one new document requirement, and that's going to be a GIS data file, essentially showing the shape and location of the facility area. We've spoken to a couple of developers about this already. They indicated it's not a really heavy lift. We will have more details on this requirement a little bit later on, but I just wanted to flag that there is one new document requirement that we have not been requiring in the past. It's a shape file just showing us, the facility area. If there's a project application you submit that's missing any required documents, we're going to reject and unsubmit that application. You gain nothing by submitting an incomplete application. It just, slows the process down for everyone. So please, hold up on your application until it's complete, and then you can hit submit. Next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit about the incentive adders. So the community adder, which is an additional upfront incentive paid for CDG projects, that is being continued and renewed. Excuse me. The initial block for the community adder is going to be 800 megawatts DC at 7 cents per watt. So if you have a community solar project, you get your base block of 17 cents a watt plus 7 cents per watt for the community adder. There will be more community adder, once the first 800 megawatts goes, up to another 1,260 megawatts in future blocks. Rates to be determined. There is an open question as to whether opt-out CCA projects can receive the full community adder. That is something that we did not get closure on in the 10 gigawatt expansion order. That will be addressed, in future CCA proceedings. You can file comments on that on the CCA proceeding. I know there's a staff white paper due in a few weeks. The inclusive community solar adder, which is essentially a juiced up community adder for projects that have DAC off-takers, that is being renewed. We had one solicitation in the past for that, which was wildly successful. and popular with the industry. Max will talk about this a little bit on a later slide. The number of megawatts and the precise incentive amount, is still to be determined, but we anticipate that will be very popular. We are continuing the multifamily affordable housing incentive. This is for projects located, on or for affordable multifamily housing. This is more of a smaller project type incentive. I believe there's a 200 kilowatt cap. That this is being renewed at $1 per watt DC. That is not an adder on top of the base incentive. Rather, the dollar per watt supersedes the base. We are continuing the brownfield landfill adder at the existing value of 15 cents per watt. In the right-hand column, you'll see that for some of these, it says there's no programmatic megawatt cap. What that statement means is we're not saying that there's a block with a finite number of megawatts that can get the brownfield adder. It's just, an open offering that doesn't have, a megawatt limit on that. The last one here is the prevailing wage adder. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but essentially projects that submit their initial utility application to the utility after the date of the order, April 14th, 2022, and are greater than 1 megawatt AC, those projects must abide by a new prevailing wage requirement in order to receive the NYSERDA incentive. However, if that prevailing wage requirement applies, they'll get the additional incentive adder, 12.5 cents per watt DC, which is designed to basically offset the incremental development cost of having prevailing wage on that project. I'll get a little bit more into detail on that. I know we're going to get a lot of prevailing wage questions, but I'm just including that here on the list of additional offerings and adders that have been approved. Looks like we are moving ahead to the Con Ed slide. So we're adding 450 megawatts of new incentive capacity to Con Edison. 150 megawatts is going to be additional incentive support for residential projects, 20 cents per watt. Those of you that are following closely, will remember that that is the current Con Ed residential incentive rate. So we're simply going to add 150 megawatts to that existing block. For the non-residential, we are breaking that into kind of small, medium, large size project categories. Small is 200 kilowatts and smaller. Medium is between 200 kilowatts and 1 megawatt. And the large projects are greater than 1 megawatt. We have separate incentive rates for each of those three buckets. And you'll see the second column lists the number of megawatts available for the first block in that category. Those first blocks are pretty big. They were sized to account for sort of the backlog of projects that are in the utility interconnection inventory. Let's move on to the next slide, please. And here is a breakdown of the incentive adders available for projects in Con Edison territory. Community adder, we're opening up with an initial block of 100 megawatts at 20 cents per watt. There will be future blocks. Con Ed community solar projects will be eligible to take the inclusive community solar adder. Again, details are TBD. We are continuing the multifamily affordable housing incentive, $1.60 per watt for non-community solar projects, $2 per watt for community solar projects. Again, you would get this in place of the base incentive, not on top of the base incentive. Brownfield landfill adder, 15 cents per watt. Prevailing wage adder, 20 cents per watt for projects, that start their initial utility interconnection application after that date and are above 1 megawatt AC. I recognize that, most Con Ed projects are under 1 megawatt AC, so such projects, would not be eligible for that prevailing wage adder and they wouldn't get that prevailing wage requirement. We are continuing the parking canopy adder and the rooftop canopy adder at the current 20 cent per watt level. Again, Those adders are not part of a block structure. There's not a number of megawatts that can achieve that incentive. Then we close it out. It's just an open offering. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pause there and rest my voice and sip some coffee. And I will let Max Joel, who's the Assistant Director of New York Sun, speak to the offerings under the Solar Energy Equity Framework. Thank you, Max.
Thank you very much, Luke. You've earned your rest. Good morning, everyone. The Solar Energy Equity Framework, as noted here, supports projects serving LMI households, regulated affordable housing, and disadvantaged communities. A significant amount of additional funding has been provided to the SEEF under the order. And in this section of the presentation, I'll be going into some details about what has changed and hasn't changed with the existing SEEF programs. As a little bit of background, the SEEF was initially proposed by NYSERDA in 2019 and approved by the Commission in 2020. And many of these programs have been in place for during that period or longer. So first, the Affordable Solar Residential Incentive. That's an added incentive for residential rooftop programs for low and moderate income homeowners. That program is not currently changing. The Multifamily Affordable Housing Incentive, which is added incentives for multifamily affordable housing. There have been some changes made, including to the incentive level in Con Ed that Luke described a little bit. I'll have more details coming up. And then the Inclusive Community Solar Adder, I'll spend some time discussing the upcoming changes to that program. And the Affordable Solar and Storage Pre-Development Technical Assistance Program, that is a grant program that has been open for several years and remains open. No changes to that program are planned at this time. And finally, a bit on a parallel path, RFP 5037, Expanded Solar for All projects, is open right now through June 16th. And projects that receive new base incentives through the newly opened blocks that we plan to open on June 1st are eligible. This program is just for projects in the National Grid Electric Service Territory, and there is a webinar coming up on Thursday, this Thursday, that goes into much more detail there. The complete RFP can also be found on the NYSERDA Current Funding Opportunities page. Next slide, please. So the multifamily affordable housing incentive, I'll start by covering the last bullet on this slide, which is that there are no changes planned to the incentive rate for Upstate and Long Island projects. It will remain at $1 a watt total. So regardless of the base incentive that is available at the time of application, projects receive $1 a watt total. However, in the Con Edison region, the incentives have changed, reflecting the overall changes to the program. So for non-CTG projects, the total will be $1.60 a watt. Again, that's the total New York Sun incentive. This incentive does not stack with the base or any other incentive. It is generally that total is going to be higher than any stack of other incentives that a project may otherwise be eligible for. For CDG projects that will not receive the community credit, it is a $2 a watt total New York Sun incentive. Now, that incentive rate is available up to 200 kilowatts. That is unchanged from the current program rules. Any capacity above 200 kilowatts will receive the available non-residential base incentive, and that will be sort of automatically calculated in the project application in the New York Sun Salesforce portal. So again, we've covered that they will not be stackable. These are the total adders, but still represent a higher incentive than any other option likely to be available to a project of this kind. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, back one. Thank you. So the Inclusive Community Solar Adder was first launched last July. We had a very strong response to the first round of the program, which provides additional incentives for CDG projects serving LMI subscribers, regulated affordable housing, and other nonprofit facilities and DACs. As Luke noted, this in some ways could be described as being a juiced community adder. It's a higher incentive level for capacity serving these eligible customers. So we have over 400 megawatts of projects from round one under award, and the roadmap and order recognized the success and potential of this program. Now in the comment period on the roadmap, we received a number of really helpful suggestions, comments, recommendations, data points related to the ICSA. We also, of course, have a full round of program experience to look back on. And then also the order did set some more specific parameters for the ICSA. With all that taken together, we are putting together a more detailed set of revisions to the program, and we'll be sharing that with all stakeholders in late May and early June. We'll then give everyone a few weeks to review that and provide specific feedback, and relaunch the program, opening it up to new capacity, including projects that may have just, in the last, in June, July, August, have submitted new New York Sun applications. Those projects plus any new ones will then be able to submit ICSA applications in late summer, early fall 2022. Next slide, please. So just to cover some of the major areas where we are planning to make modifications, this really kind of covers every aspect of the program, and is again really meant to be responsive to the feedback and experience we've received. So just to emphasize that point, we are not starting over from scratch. We aren't asking people to sort of do a new comment process or resubmit information they've already given us. We're taking everything that we've received formally and informally into account, and then hoping to share with all of you a almost finished product that you'll then have another chance to look at and comment on, and we can make final revisions and get this out the door later this year. Next slide, please. Okay, and I believe now I can hand it back over to Luke. Thank you very much.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Let's move on to the next slide, please. And just to address one question that's come in multiple times, yes, we are recording the webinar. I will show you on the last slide, where that will be posted. We've also been getting a lot of questions so far about prevailing wage, so I'm glad we have the slide giving it a little bit more detail. So this is going to be a new requirement for projects to get the NYSERDA incentive. It applies to projects greater than 1 megawatt AC. NYSERDA typically tracks things in DC, but this is AC. That submit their initial utility interconnection application after the date the order was released, April 14th. So many projects that have already started their development work will not have this requirement applied to them. We do have an additional incentive adder that we're releasing for projects that are subject to this additional prevailing wage requirement. 12.5 cents per watt DC upstate, 20 cents per watt DC downstate in the Con Ed region. Cost of labor is higher there. That's why Con Ed has a richer rate. The adder is going to be paid out, the same way that the base incentive or community adder is paid out, namely for non-residential projects or Con Ed projects, 100% of PTO, and for the upstate commercial industrial projects, 50% at PTO, 25% at the end of year one, 25% at the end of year two. These last couple bullets are pretty important, and these address some questions that have been rolling in as well. If your project is not required to meet the prevailing wage requirements for the criteria specified in the first bullet, you do not have the option of voluntarily paying your workers prevailing wage in order to get the incentive adder. So you cannot opt into the prevailing wage requirements to receive the incentive. Likewise, projects below 1 megawatt or that made that utility milestone application before the date of the order and are for public projects, these projects may have a legal requirement to pay prevailing wage, but these would not be eligible for the prevailing wage adder. So for example, if you're installing 100 kilowatts on a state building, that would not be eligible for the prevailing wage adder. That adder is just for above megawatt that meet that utility milestone. There are a lot of very nuanced questions regarding prevailing wage that we frankly don't have all the answers to yet. Our legal staff is working very closely with Department of Labor to finalize all the details. The NYSERDA team will put together, guidance documents, and we will disseminate all those details and requirements, as soon as we get firm answers that we can share. In the meantime, I can say that the prevailing wage requirement for New York Sun will look an awful lot like the prevailing wage requirement for NYSERDA's large-scale renewables program. If you work in that program, you can expect something quite similar on the New York Sun side as well. Next slide, please. This looks like a simple topic at first glance, but there are actually a lot of caveats and a lot of details here. So I want to make sure we really take our time going through this slide. Projects that already received a New York Sun award cannot cancel that project application and reapply in order to get the new rate. Please don't attempt to do so. We can track it by Caesar number. We have your project details. In broad strokes, new incentive dollars are for new projects. A few caveats to that, though. There are a suite of projects out there that received a community adder or inclusive community adder or even a brownfield adder, but no base incentive. Those projects will be able to receive the new base incentive. We accounted for that in the budget. We know that there are, I think, 22 projects out there that this applies to. We're not going to make you submit a new application from scratch. Our program team will reach out to you regarding those 22 projects and will inform you of the process on how to go and get that new base incentive. On the flip side, third bullet, projects that received a base incentive but no community adder will not be able to apply for the new community adder. Those projects, had the ability to apply for inclusive community adder or CA, but we have to have some budget certainty. So projects that miss the boat on that will not be able to apply in for the new incentives. Fourth bullet I mentioned earlier, we do not have an answer yet as to whether projects that are opt-out community choice aggregation will be able to take the community adder or not. We look forward to getting clarity on that in the community choice aggregation proceeding in the very near future. Second to last bullet, Con Ed non-res plot, this is a mouthful. Con Ed non-residential projects that applied to the megawatt block program after the date of the roadmap, and additionally any other Con Ed non-res projects in Block 10 that missed out on the community credit can receive the new megawatt block rate. So if you missed out on the community credit and you locked in, the low megawatt block rate, you will be able to cancel your project application and reapply to the new Con Ed megawatt block at the higher incentive rate. That's essentially a way for making up for losing that community credit. We accounted for that in the project economics. Finally, this will apply to a very, very small number of projects out there. If you have a Con Ed project and you did get the community credit, but you haven't gotten around for applying to the New York Sun megawatt block yet, you will get the old block rate of 20 cents per watt. In the old multifamily affordable housing incentive rate, if applicable, we can't justify giving a 12-cent per kilowatt hour community credit and the $1.20 per watt to one of those projects. So if you still have community credit, you would get the old block rate of 20 cents per watt. I'll pause here for a second. Please feel free to take a screenshot of this slide, because I know there's a lot of detail here talking about a lot of different project use cases. Okay, and I see that the questions are trickling in. We will get to them. Let's move on to the next slide. Value stack. I just want to clarify that the order essentially makes no changes to the value stack. There were a lot of developer questions and a lot of developer interest in, can we opt into a newer E-value if we already got the old E-value of 2.4 cents or 2.7 cents? Is there a way we can opt into the 3.1 cents? No, projects lock in their E-value when they make their 25% utility upgrade payments. There's no mechanism for upgrading your E-value. The one thing of note is that the order specifies that the E-value, currently 3.103 cents per kilowatt hour, is being maintained at its current level until what's known as the midterm review or the mid-period review. What is that mid-period review? That's a great segue to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I went out of order. I missed my cue here. I just wanted to take a second and acknowledge that. Sorry, let's go to the project development headwinds slide. Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of difficulty in the national and international PV industry now. Module cost and availability is a very large concern. We have this Department of Commerce trade case regarding the anti-dumping circumvention study examination that's being done. We know that inflation, commodity prices, steel prices are very large concerns to developers. I just want to acknowledge that those difficulties are out there. NYSERDA is tracking those very closely. We're in close communications with the trade groups, SEIA, NYSEA, New York Best. And we are, keeping very close tabs on what is happening out there in the wider economic solar market. We are going to, keep all these issues and keep all these difficulties in mind, as we're thinking about future program changes. So I just wanted to take a minute and acknowledge some of these challenges that are going on, and remind you that we don't make decisions and program design choices in a vacuum. So we will continue addressing, and working with stakeholders and trade groups to stay apprised and make sure we really understand what's going out there. Next slide, please. We're getting down near the end of the presentation. There is an element addressed in the order such that when we are significantly through the program, we're going to stop, we're going to pause, we're going to take a look at all of the incentive rates and all of the program details. This is called the Midpoint Review. NYSERDA will coordinate with DPS and conduct a formal program evaluation. When the first of these three things happen, those things being, when half of our Upstate capacity is allocated, or half of the new Con Ed capacity is allocated, or December 31st, 2025. I anticipate we'll burn through half the capacity before the end of 2025. But the idea is that once that milestone is met, NYSERDA is going to do a study of average project costs. We're going to take a look at interconnection costs. We're going to take a look at project trends. We're going to take a look at what the uptake has been for the various adders and sub-programs. And we would use that information to potentially make adjustments to the program. to make sure that the program design is in line with the economic realities and the direction of development in the industry. So you'll see, if you take a look through the 10 gigawatt expansion order, there are many topics that say, well, we're doing this for now, but we will potentially reevaluate that in the midpoint review. That's what this midpoint review is. It's halfway through the program. We're going to pause and we're going to do a detailed study of progress to date. That midpoint review, will be filed with the Public Service Commission, and that will be open for public comments through I believe, a 60-day public comment SAPA period. So that's something that everyone in the industry will have an opportunity to comment on. Next slide, please. We made it to the end. I see we have many, many dozens of questions and more are rolling in. Before we get to answering those, can we just take a peek at the next two slides? Thank you very much. If you have questions about this presentation or program design questions in general, you can send those to communitysolar@nyserda.ny.gov, or you can reach out to anyone on the team individually. Please remember that this Thursday, we will be having another WebEx. This will be about requests for proposals for expanded solar for all. If you're not already registered, you can dig that email out of your box, or you can reach out to any of us and we will help you register for that. Today's webinar, has been recorded. We're going to record the Q&A as well. We're going to post the slides and a link to the video recording on the New York Sun Resources for Contractors page. There's a subsection called Stakeholder Meeting Updates. It'll be posted there. Please give us 48 to 72 hours to actually get that posted. And I think we have one more slide, please. And if you're not already on our email list, you can sign up for that email list using the Contact Us button on the New York Sun website. And that's all I have. So let's move back to that Q&A slide, please. And my colleague Shia Mehta is going to be kind of the MC for the Q&A section. And please bear with us. Sometimes it'll take us a moment or two to discuss the answer. So if there's a little bit of dead air time on the line, that just means we're working on an answer. Thank you very much for joining today. And I will let Shyam kick off the Q&A.
Thanks, Luke, and good morning, everybody. So I'm going to kick off the Q&A by answering a few questions myself, and then we'll be asking one of my colleagues to take the mic for others, depending on the subject matter area. And just as a housekeeping note, in case we aren't able to get to every single question today, i.e. before 11:30, and we have received very many questions, we will be reaching out directly to folks that have very specific questions, and we are also probably going to issue an FAQ type document for the most commonly received questions, including those that we answer during this webinar. So with that, let me take a stab at answering a few questions to begin with. First is, when it comes to the incremental 4 gigawatt goal, as well as the 10 gigawatt by 2030 goal, are large solar projects, i.e. those subject to Section 94C, included in the goal? So the answer is no. Both the goals are specific to distributed solar deployment, and in New York, that is defined as projects that are 5 megawatt AC and under. So the goals are specific to distributed solar and the distributed solar sector. Second commonly received question is, and this is, Luke has addressed this in the slides, but since we've received it so many times, I think it's just worth clarifying again. can a project that applied that made its initial utility application, interconnection application before the date of the roadmap order, opt to use the prevailing wage and then receive the prevailing wage adder? So as Luke mentioned, the answer to that question is no, projects cannot opt in to the prevailing wage requirement. The requirement applies specifically to projects that are greater than or equal to 1 megawatt AC in size and submitted and submit their initial utility interconnection application after the date of the roadmap order, which is April 15, 2022 going forward. And just as a matter of clarification, just one clarification to the presentation, the prevailing wage requirement, the programmatic requirement that was proposed in the roadmap and approved in the order, applies to projects greater than or equal to 1 megawatt AC. So that's something we need to just rectify in the presentation slides, because the slide mentions only greater than, but it does apply to projects exactly at 1 megawatt AC as well. Just taking a look at some more questions here. There's one question regarding the 800 megawatt initial block that we would be rolling out for the Upstate CNI segment. We described less than 800 megawatt of mature projects upstate. Are we expecting around 800 megawatt, or is there room in this base block to remain for some time? So that is a great question, and that is not a question that I think we can answer, or that anyone really has answer to, because in terms of eligibility for the New York Sun incentives, remember that that is incumbent on making both the 25% interconnection payment as well as securing your local non-ministerial permits. And while we do have data and a good sense of how many projects have made the 25% payment, the question on the permitting milestones, we do not have access to for every single project. So it is, and that is exactly why we are conducting this ranking exercise that Luke mentioned with regard to the dates of 100% and 25% interconnection payment. On a related note, on the question of, in the case that more than 800 megawatts of complete applications are received in the first 2 weeks, and we aren't as fast off the draw, could there be a reshuffling based on if for projects that have made their 100% payment before other projects? So just to be clear again, the intent is that projects that have made their 100% interconnection payment and have also secured the non-ministerial permits would be prioritized, that they would be ranked higher than projects that have not made the 100% payment. Just bear with me while I scan the question list further. Going back to prevailing wage, again, just worth re-clarifying. So the question is, does a project that applied to the utility, i.e. I'm taking that to mean there's a project that submitted its initial interconnection application to the utility before before the date of the roadmap order, need to cancel its utility application and refile it if it wants to participate in the adder. So again, just re-clarifying that the order is very clear that only projects that submitted their initial utility interconnection application after April 14, 2022, and greater than or equal to 1 megawatt AC are subject to the prevailing wage requirement. So again, the projects cannot opt into the prevailing wage requirement if they are not required programmatically. All right, so for the next round of questions, I'm going to hand the mic off to folks depending on, again, their subject matter area. And the first slug of questions are probably for Luke. So Luke, we'll call you back to take up the mic. So the first question is for you, I think, is will NYSERDA be ready to accept applications on June 1st, or would that be taking longer?
We're planning on June 1st opening up the program. You know, we will send out an email blast to everyone that says the program is open. The only reason it wouldn't be June 1st is if there was some big catastrophic, technical issue. But I really don't anticipate that happening. So mark your calendars. We're planning on June 1st.
Thanks, Luke. Second question is, the question is maybe a little vague in terms of what is the criteria for unincentivized projects. I think it may be useful to clarify again the what makes up that 4 gigawatt incremental target and what that allocation of quote unquote unincentivized projects refers to there.
Yeah, so when we're talking about unincentivized projects, these are just projects that didn't apply for or receive any NYSERDA money. For instance, we know there are, a handful of installers out there, who are installing without going through the New York Sun program. Additionally, we have Upstate residential incentive money to get us through many more years. But the day may come, for instance, 2029, 2030, when those Upstate residential blocks are out, but some residential installations will still happen. So we think that some projects will occur outside of the New York Sun umbrella by 2030. That's what we were getting at there.
Thanks, Luke. Going back to the prevailing wage topic, and this is something I think I can take a stab at answering. And then DPS colleagues, please feel free to jump in and add or correct me if I'm misspeaking here. So the question is, will the prevailing wage criteria also target unincentivized projects, or will it only target those that receive program funds? So good question. And I believe the answer here is it's, again, the requirement to pay prevailing wage is specific to projects to New York Sun projects, i.e. incentivized projects. So for example, currently Long Island projects do not receive New York Sun incentives, barring the residential PV plus energy storage incentive. So if you're let's say you're a 2 megawatt project in Long Island, you do not that submitted an interconnection application today, you would not be subject to that prevailing wage requirement because you would not be eligible for New York Sun incentives. Again, if anyone wants to jump in and add anything here, feel free to do that. And I'll just stop here for a second.
Hi, this is Warren. That is correct. If you read the commission order, it very clearly what the order is saying is to receive these New York Sun incentives, the commission is requiring or conditioning receiving those incentives on if you are 1 megawatt or greater, so even equal to 1 megawatt, and if you submitted your initial application after April 14th, you would need to pay prevailing wages. So it's the receipt of the New York Sun incentives that are conditioned on this prevailing wage requirement.
Thank you, Warren. Again, sticking with prevailing wage, which you are understandably receiving many questions. And I think, again, I'll take a stab at answering this and ask Luke to fill in on top. So the question is, why is the prevailing wage adder a separate item and not just part of a higher base? So Luke, maybe it's just worth clarifying exactly how the prevailing wage adder works procedurally in terms of whether you need to apply to it separately, whether it's part of the base incentive, and how it will be paid out.
Yeah, so when you submit a project in Salesforce, there's going to be a checkbox or a dropdown or some sort of field where you will say, yes, I am subject to the prevailing wage requirement, or no, I am not. And if you select, yes, I am, then you would get the adder, and we would also, check your documentation for that. But the reason we're not just giving everyone the extra 12.5 cents is we know that the prevailing wage requirement does not apply to all projects. It just applies to greater than 1 megawatt projects that started their initial utility application, submitted their initial utility interconnection application after a certain date. So in other words, we don't want to give that adder to projects that don't have to meet that requirement.
Okay, thanks, Luke. Sticking with you again, question is there a cap on how many projects a developer can submit, or a cap to how much money they can qualify for? I believe the answer is no, there is no such cap, but you want
No,
to just clarify?
no, if you have 100 projects and they all meet our requirements, you're free to submit 100 project applications. We're not limiting, any one installer.
Thanks. Procedural question with regard to application submission. Will projects that are already in accepted status that are eligible for the new incentives, i.e. did not receive the previous round incentives, be able to apply using the same process or methodology?
So I think this question has to do with the 22 projects out there that received an adder but no base incentive. Allison Nelligan, please speak up if you're able to do so. But I believe the plan is for NYSERDA staff to reach out to the developers of those 22 project applications, and then we will work with you to modify the incentive award.
Yes, Luke, that is correct. We will reach out to you directly. You will not have to do anything in Salesforce. We'll take care of the Salesforce work. What we will be sending you is a revised application that will need to be executed by everybody. But again, that's something we will generate and send out to you.
Yep. By contrast, Con Ed non-residential projects in Block 10 that did not get the community credit, they can just simply cancel their applications in Salesforce and reapply under the new block structure. So it's a different process for those Upstate projects and those Con Ed projects.
Great, thanks, Luke. And I think that actually by saying that, you also answered a question about how projects, Con Ed projects that missed out on the community credit. But sorry, go ahead.
That's why I said it. Yeah.
Yep.
If you don't mind, Shyam, I'll take a few more questions because I'm on a roll here.
Sure.
We were talking about the midpoint review. I had a poor choice of wording, as I sometimes do. I said that the midpoint review is a time for us to pause and reflect on progress and incentive rates. I shouldn't have used the word pause. The intention is not to close the blocks or stop the program or anything like that. I meant that just in the sense that the midpoint review is a time to evaluate progress and plot potential program changes. There's not an intention to close any blocks or halt the program.
Great, thanks, Luke. So I'm going to give you a break for at least a few minutes and come to a couple of questions that I think Max Joel is probably best positioned to answer. So the first is the question about whether we are providing or contemplating an adder for floating solar projects, sometimes, or as we call them here, photovoltaic. So Max, do you want to take that one?
Absolutely. Thanks, Shyam. And you beat me to the punch on saying photovoltaics. So the order, I think, indirectly addressed this. There was some comments and notes raised about agrivoltaics, another fun term, which is solar sort of sited or designed in a beneficial way for farming around or even beneath the solar project. So the order noted that an added incentive there may be appropriate and directed NYSERDA to look at that, as well as potentially what's referred to in the order as a beneficial siting adder. Potentially propose that adder in like a new petition to the Public Service Commission. So as we as we do that, we're including photovoltaics in that sort of research and ultimately proposal. So the answer is yes, but there is going to need to be a process going forward, including a new proposal to the Commission.
Thanks, Max. So sticking with you, I've gotten a couple of questions about just asking us to clarify which adders are and are not stackable. So do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, I think the short answer is, subject to, of course, the individual requirements and eligibility and so on. They're all stackable except the multifamily affordable housing incentive, and I mean within kind of the non-residential and commercial industrial incentives. And just to kind of give the background there, because I think that kind of intention is sometimes misinterpreted. The goal in setting the multifamily adder as being a fixed higher total incentive versus part of a set of stackable adders was one that was kind of put in place several years ago when that incentive launched, and that was really in response to working with some of the regulated affordable housing providers and the solar installers, working with them at that time and identifying that these are projects that take a longer time to develop. There's other layers of sort of regulatory and building issues involved, so they needed the certainty of what that adder would be. So we went with the program design of that fixed adder that will maintain its level regardless of what happens to the base blocks or other adders. And I also think if you do the math on the multifamily adder as it's been proposed, like it will always be higher than stacking up any other adders that the same project could get. So it's really meant to be sort of that constant higher certain level on the for qualified projects. But yeah, everything else does stack. So for example, under the new Con Ed structure, there's a 20-cent community adder. There's a minimum 30-cent ICSA, which is what was directed in the order. So that's a total of 50 cents on top of the base incentive that's set out, which again, we think will be pretty compelling for project developers and providers to look at community solar that serves disadvantaged communities.
Thanks, Max. So again, staying with you, question is, what are your expectations with regard to how many megawatts are going to be in remote crediting versus CDG, and how will New York Sun adjust to ensure the correct balance between the two options?
Thanks, Shyam. So great question. The analysis we did leading up to the roadmap, targeted 70%. I could say at this point, I think I would estimate between 50 and 70%. And that will, I think depend on some other market and policy factors, and very importantly, the resolution of the CCA community solar process. Along the lines of the staff straw proposal that was submitted, that would seem to open up a lot of other opportunities for community solar, and push the balance more towards the higher end. Likewise, I think that the large chunks of funding in the ICSA will also help drive the economics, not just towards community solar, but to community solar benefiting LMI households and disadvantaged communities. All that said, I think this was sort of underlined in the order specified by the commission. There is no kind of exact correct balance that NYSERDA is targeting through the program, or that we're required to hit. It's really just I think more along the lines of that general intention to maintain a balanced market with a lot of different types of projects.
Great, thanks, Max. So given the time we have left, I want to turn to the ICSA. We've gotten a few questions just around that incentive, and I will ask Sarah Jayanthi to take the mic for this next the ICSA questions. So Sarah, the first question just for that has come from a few folks is just to clarify what the order has actually stated with regard to the ICSA, specifically the Con Ed ICSA. And so just wondering if you can clarify the level at which the ICSA was set for Con Ed, and then whether the order actually did so for Upstate, and if not, what the process to land on that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Shyam. So you are correct. I think we got a couple questions about this, that the order did set the Con Ed rate at 30 cents a watt. So that will be the rate for the ICSA for Con Ed territory. As far as the update, as far as for the Upstate rates, you know, our plan, we're figuring out kind of what the structure of those rates will be, and those will be shared when we release those draft program rules, as Max had alluded to, in late May or early June. You know, the reason why we're not releasing them now is one of the things that we are hoping to do with the Upstate and the Con Ed programs is to have an added incentive for projects that demonstrate additional community benefits. So, you know, having a standard incentive for the ICSA, but then also an additional incentive if projects are able to provide additional community benefits. So all of that's being worked out. That's all going to be kind of part of those proposed program rules that we're going to be sharing to stakeholders. And, you know, as Max had mentioned in the presentation, you know, we really wanted to put together this next round of the ICSA so that it was going to be useful for the for the solar industry, but then also will still continue to provide benefits to the eligible subscribers that we're hoping to support with the program.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Just what maybe worth clarifying, how much capacity was awarded in the first round of the ICSA, and whether you can speak to whether there's any capacity that's being waitlisted there, and if so, will that need to reapply for the next round of the ICSA?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So around, you know, over 400 megawatts were awarded under the current round of the ICSA. There's no capacity that's been waitlisted. I think any project that applied, you know, has either been awarded or there are other kind of reasons why they're in the process of getting awarded. As far as any projects, so yeah, I guess to answer that question, we don't have any projects that have been waitlisted, and so any projects that are coming in would be new applications for the program.
Got it. Thank you.
Great.
Sorry, I'm just scanning the remaining questions and just trying to do a bit of triaging given the time we have left.
Yeah, while you're scanning, I'll take a couple quick ones here. The parking canopy and rooftop canopy incentive adders are available for the Con Ed territory only. They're not available for Upstate New York. And we do not have any detail at this time about you know, future blocks above and beyond what we showed. We don't want to commit to telling you that a future block will step down by X amount, given the amount of uncertainty out there in the industry right now. We will publish, you know, the new block rates once we get close to the end of the current blocks, but we don't want to commit, you know, too far in advance, given how many balls are up in the air and the policy side. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. One question with regard to the ranking or prioritizing of applications with regard to the first block for Upstate. Can we clarify what's meant by the 100% payment that will be used to prioritize applications if there is a lot of volume in the program open? So that 100% payment is meant to refer to the 100% interconnection deposit, or sometimes it's referred to the 75% payment because there is an earlier 25% milestone. So again, the intent is that projects that have secured their non-ministerial permits and have made their full interconnection payment would be prioritized in terms of ranking them for the next block. And worth just clarifying again, question of eligibility for the new incentives, because that has come up again from a number of folks, although we did spell it out on the slide. So so again, at a high level, if your project has previously been awarded a base megawatt block incentive, awarded, not applied for, then you would not be allowed to cancel and reapply for the new incentives. You would not be eligible for the new adders, rather. However, if a project previously did receive one or more of the ICSA, the brownfield landfill adder, or community adder, but missed out on the base incentive, you would be able to apply for the new base incentive. Now, do recognize there are a few other permutations and combinations here. So if there's any further clarity you're seeking on this matter with regard to specific projects, I would encourage you to just reach out to us directly and we can help clarify the question of eligibility for your specific project there. Couple of questions with regard to energy storage, i.e., is there more funding for storage incentives on the horizon? So the roadmap order, the 10 gigawatt DG solar roadmap order that we are discussing here does not pertain to storage incentives. However, folks may be aware that Governor Hochul, as part of our State of the State address this year, announced an updated energy storage target for New York of 6 gigawatts by 2030, which is doubling our CLCPA mandate of 3 gigawatts by 2030. And as a function of that, directed NYSERDA and DPS to update the energy storage roadmap to chart a pathway to that updated goal. So that question of funding for incentives will be taken up by that roadmap, which is expected to be filed this year and is under development. So just have a couple of minutes left, and seeing a number of very specific questions that, again, we will endeavor to reach out to folks directly in the next couple of weeks. And I guess, okay, here's one. I think this is for Chris Rogers. You can take the mic, Chris. What are the requirements to qualify for the multifamily affording housing incentive?
Sure. Broadly, the requirements are that a project must be sited directly upon regulated affordable housing, and that documentation of regulated affordable housing would be demonstrated by the existence of a regulatory agreement with an oversight authority. On our website in the resources for contractors section, there is a document that contains a list of the most common types of proxy regulatory agreements that you see from organizations such as Homes and Community Renewal, New York City Housing Preservation Development, HUD. But in general, it's regulated affordable housing documented by the existence of a regulatory agreement would establish that.
Great, thank you, Chris. So at this point, I'm not seeing too many other questions that are really cover more than one specific project or a handful of projects. So I will cede the mic to any of my colleagues that wants to take up any of the questions that have come in the time I've been moderating, or any additional ones I've missed before we wrap things up.
Shyam, I'm kind of baffled and delighted how many questions we managed to cross off that list. I think we covered most of them. More of an announcement than a question. The value stack calculator has been updated. An announcement about that will be going out by email shortly. But if developers would like to use that updated calculator, for new projects, that is now posted to the website.
Great, thanks, Luke. Okay, so at this point, we're just about coming up on time. So I will just thank everybody for your participation and your time here. We got a really strong turnout that I think reflects that there is a lot of interest in the future of New York's distributed solar market, which is fantastic. Just again to reiterate that this presentation will be posted on the New York Sun Resources for Contractors webpage. There will also be a video of the presentation that is uploaded on YouTube. And we will be getting back to folks directly with regard to any of the relevant questions that we haven't had time to answer. And we'll also likely be posting the more common questions as part of an FAQ in coming weeks as well. So with that, again, just want to thank everybody for their time. Thank all my NYSERDA and DPS colleagues for their participation and time here, and hope to stay in touch with all of you in the coming days and weeks as we roll out the next round of incentives and continue building and scaling up New York's distributed solar market. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.